few technical hitches. I'm Simon Stevens. I'm the Head of Publications and Events at the Museums Association. So welcome to one of our New Look Members Together's meetings. Welcome to all of you in the room. And we've also got about 200 people signed up online, as this is a hybrid event. So some of that was related to the technical problems we were having earlier, but I think things are working fine now. So, but just bear in mind that there might be a few tech problems, but hopefully it will run smoothly from now on. So we've got a great range of speakers today. There's been a break in the middle where you can meet MA staff, mainly Craig Smith, to talk about our Mindsets and Missions programme. More about that in a sec. We'll end at about 5:20 today with a drinks reception to celebrate the launch of the next phase of the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund. So that will be in the Futures Gallery. It will be open there as well, so you can explore that. Before we kick off with the first session, I'd just like to flag up a few MA events we've got coming up on the 8th of December. We've got an online-only one-day conference on building sustainable community partnerships. And in the new year, on 23rd of February, we've got another online-only one-day conference on exhibition design. So to find out anything about those events, please visit the MA website. Our website is also the place to go for information about our campaigns, whether that's our decolonisation, anti-racism, climate justice or museum ethics campaigns. The website also outlines our extensive workforce offer, which includes our learning programme, Museum Essentials, and it's also got all the MJ content. So, that's it me. Before I hand over to our first speakers, I'm just briefly going to invite Craig Smith up to the stage, because Craig is leading on our Mindset and Missions programme, and Craig is going to briefly outline what will be available when if you want to chat to him in the break. So, over to you, Craig.
Thanks very much, Simon. Hello, everybody. Hello to everyone in person and everyone online as well. My name is Craig Smith, as Simon says, and I am the Project Officer for Mindsets and Missions. Mindsets and Missions, if you haven't heard of it, is an exciting new programme within the Museums Association in collaboration with Liminal Space and the ASDC, the Association for Science and Discovery Centres, and it's funded by UK Research and Innovation. So, what is Mindsets and Missions? Very, very briefly, before you come along you're invited to come along to the session at the break time at 3:45 to find out more information for a little bit of hands-on conversation as well. But Mindsets and Missions is a project bringing together the Science Centre sector and the Museums and Galleries sector for research and innovation within these centres with community partners. These are traditionally and typically underrepresented audiences we're looking to work with and have them at the helm of research and innovation in these centres that can really push forward the idea of what the future of these places look like, how they can better serve audiences more equitably and sustainably, and also just the idea of what is a future citizen with the huge changes in society that we see all around us, with racial injustice at the forefront of conversation, climate justice a big part of the conversation nowadays, social inequality, a major thing that we have to talk about, and we are within these spaces. How do we do that fairly and equitably, and with the people who are most affected really driving that conversation and driving how museums and science centres deal with that and talk about it? So, very, very big, very, very broad, but it has to be, because it has to be driven by the people that whose voices we need to hear within museums and science centres and galleries. So, at the break at 3:45, just in this room here, I'm going to be running just a short session, drop in for questions and answers. If you're an individual, a freelancer perhaps, or a researcher, or if you represent a museum or gallery and you want to know more about how you can get involved in this programme, which is for first of all, building a learning cohort, and second of all, later in the spring, being able to apply for some money to drive forward a project, please do come along to speak to me. If you are online and you can't, of course, join us in person for the break session, please do get in touch with me at craig@museumsassociation.org. And also on the 8th of December, right before the event that Simon just mentioned, we are running an open Q&A online. So at the Museums Association website, you'll be able to find information about Mindsets and Missions, as well as the drop-in Q&A online. And please do get in touch with me as well. I'll be happy to have conversations on an individual or group basis with you all. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass back to Simon.
Thanks so much, Craig. Just quickly before I hand over to our first speakers, I missed out the classic housekeeping thing, which is there are no fire alarms planned, but if you do hear an alarm, please exit by one of the clearly marked exits, and I think we assemble in front of the building. So that's it. I will now pass over for our first session to Gillian and Simon and Olivia, who are going to be talking about various things, including museums change lives and cost of living, and I'm sure a few other things. So welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'll move this a bit closer. Can you hear all right? Yes, good afternoon, everybody here today in person in Birmingham. It's lovely to see so many of you, and welcome as well to our friends and colleagues who are joining us online. We're delighted to be able to kick off the meeting today with a discussion which I know will be at the forefront of many people's minds, thinking personally, thinking about their families, thinking about their workplace and their organisations. We're talking about the cost of living crisis. And with me are Simon Brown and Olivia Mitchell. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Jill Finlay. I'm president of the Museums Association currently. I've been a board member since 2017, and I'm also the engagement and curatorial manager at Museums and Galleries Edinburgh. I'll pass over to my colleagues to say a bit about themselves and where they work.
Hi, I'm Olivia Mitchell. I'm currently the site manager for Ashbury de la Zouch Castle and Kirby Muxloe Castle. So they are English heritage, what's the word? Sites. So I am also the MA rep for the Midlands. So you'll see me out and about in the Midlands.
Cheers. We couldn't afford 3 mics. My name is Simon Brown. I'm Vice President of the Museums Association. I work in 2 part-time jobs in Nottinghamshire. So I'm curator at Newstead Abbey Historic House in North Nottinghamshire. And I'm also co-manager of Erewash Museum in Ilkeston, just outside Nottingham.
Thank you both. So just to set the scene a little bit for the discussion we're going to have today, what we're hoping to do is just discuss with you together some of the issues around cost of living that museums are facing and how the sector is responding. We're going to reference the examples, some of the examples that we know about on the way, but you here will all know of others. You will be responsible for initiating some or participating in some. So we want to leave a little bit of room at the end of our discussion to hear from you, to hear about the creative and the good practice that we know is going on really widely around museums across the country. So please do prepare as we're speaking to share what's working for you, what your concerns are, and any examples that you think it would benefit all of us to hear about. So the context for the discussion today is one again, you'll all be horribly familiar with. About a year ago, museums all over were starting to talk about rebuilding, starting to talk about reopening in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We were hopeful about audiences building again over the Christmas holidays and into the spring. And I don't think any of us really could have anticipated the incredible series of events which have resulted in the current energy and cost of living crisis. Some of you, I hope, are aware the MA very quickly made a statement, and we highlighted the many ways that the crisis is hitting our sector, that it's hitting your museums and yourselves and your colleagues, and calling for long-term investment to support the sector, to help it to become more energy efficient and to create sustainable futures. So today we are going to look at some of the issues specific to museum operations, but we're going to kick off by thinking about the role and the expectation of museums that's emerging and being discussed a lot in the media at the moment. It's very interesting about how we support our communities, our local families and residents to get through the difficult months ahead. So I'm going to pose a question for my colleagues here to start off with and ask, how are museums that you know supporting communities through the cost of living crisis this winter? Are there examples that you can share either in your own workplace or round about where you live and work?
Airwash this is on, isn't it, this microphone? Nice, brilliant, thanks. We all kind of, we've been discussing this a lot in our work about how to basically make ourselves relevant to people's lives. And that's a conversation we should be considering anyway in all of our work. But what we've been considering, especially at Aerowash Museum, is how to make our space somewhere that is relevant to people to come and spend their time. That's an existential question for all of us, but that also means people can take advantage of us having our heating on and us having our resources and our facilities here. So we've been looking at how we can put on free activities during the day, both at weekends and during the week, that's relevant to people who need to get out of the house. So we've just started exploring a partnership with the National Saturday Club, which is a charity based in London, but they work UK-wide. If none of you are aware of the National Saturday Club, look them up, because they do cool stuff, and their remit is to put on activities for secondary school age children, kind of age 12 to 16, with partners across a variety of partners, universities as well as museums and libraries mainly. And they help support that with their frameworks, and they put on basically classes for art and design, for engineering, for fashion and textiles. So we're looking at working in partnership with them to put on something meaningful in our museum on a Saturday, so people can come to us rather than having to be at home and use their own resources. That's something we're looking to do for various age groups. We're going to use the museum as a hub to collect for the local food bank and the hygiene bank, which I know a lot of you are doing currently. It feels right that we use the museum as a civic space to facilitate the work of other people doing the real work. That's how I've always looked at it for us. If we can platform and support others doing their work, then that's where I feel we can be most helpful. So we're doing that. We've just started collecting. We were talking earlier about how we're collecting toys, donations of toys for Christmas presents for people, because we're all struggling. We've all basically got less money. So I know it's, I don't mind saying it's difficult for us at home to be able to afford toys for everybody who would normally get toys from us this Christmas. Not only our children, but our families. So we hit upon the idea, suggested by our visitors, that we take in donations of toys. We're wrapping them, and then people can come and collect them if they want to use them and give them to families, to their family. We know that that's a good and positive thing, but we also, the biggest consideration and the most conversation around that is how to do that appropriately. How to do that without making people feel like they're going to a food bank, or trying to do it without putting so much pressure on people who come to collect from us. So that's been the biggest consideration in that sense. But they're just examples of the things that we're doing.
Did you want to say?
Yeah.
So I know of a couple of places in and around sort of the local region, so local libraries, council offices that are providing sort of warm spaces for people to come and sit and chat together, have a hot drink, and just hang in a nice space that's away from home, that doesn't cost them a lot of money to explore, which I think is really valuable for those places to offer that to those people that need it, without feeling like they need to ask someone for help. It's offered, and it's there if they do want to take advantage of that, to go and sit and chat to just random people, which some people do miss in the winter months. You don't get out and about. It's too cold to sit outside, and it's just nice for them to have.
And it's really interesting, just picking up on both your points, that certainly the emphasis in the service that I work, the council area that I work in, is very much on the activities and the events that are happening rather than the spaces themselves. So trying to get away from the danger of stigmatising people. In Scotland, we don't talk about warm banks. That hasn't taken off. But we are talking about warm and welcoming spaces. and the emphasis is on the welcome rather than the warm, and it's about the engagement that you can facilitate. What I've really noticed, and which I think is really interesting and a real opportunity actually for our sector, is the amount of activity that's going on in partnership, largely with third sector organisations. I know in our council area an awful lot of work is already going on because it's part of the core objectives of so many community embedded third sector organisations, cultural organisations and social support bodies, but also other services within the local authority. And it's been really interesting to me to see how libraries have been really at the forefront of this work, and how they're considered by so many, and have been for so long already, as warm and welcoming spaces. It's what they always do. It's what they've always done. They've been open to a variety of activities, from BookBug to getting your bus pass. They're open for the youngest in our communities to the oldest, and there's a real sense that they are leading this. And of course, Silip produced that wonderful guidance recently. I don't know if everybody's seen it. I would recommend you have a look on their website if you haven't, about creating warm and welcoming spaces and what that might look like. It's really excellent. But it got me thinking, after all these years that museums have been working so hard, so many of us, to try and make sure our spaces do feel open, that they do feel welcoming to everybody, why are we still second to libraries? What is different about our spaces that still means that they're not the natural leaders in a discussion or a framing of this kind of conversation?
I think that personally, I know people that wouldn't see museums as a welcoming space to them. They feel it's a space that they have to go and learn something. But, you know, I don't see that as that sort of, it's a nice day out, you might go and see something that interests you a little bit. My mum would always go with her family, 7 kids, there would be a free day out for them, and it was just really nice, and that's what she remembers, is just going out and having a nice time. But yeah, I think there's sort of, libraries are sort of institutionalised in the community spaces as places to go, and that's always just, it's kind of a British culture thing, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Yeah, it's a good comparison as libraries, isn't it? I mean, when I think back to when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I didn't have a museum within walking distance. I grew up in a town, I grew up in Leeds, just outside Leeds. So there were art galleries in town that I didn't touch. I didn't go near, even though they were free entry. I was astonished to work that out, but I felt art galleries were either for people who were posh or good at art. And I was emphatically neither of those things. And so the place I went, I used to go to the library. I used to go to our local library and just sit on the floor and pile books around me. And I was allowed to do that. I didn't feel like I certainly didn't get turfed out or anything like that. I just felt I could be myself in that space. And I never thought about that until I moved to Nottingham and I saw these amazing museums there, and that I felt comfortable and welcome in. I didn't think about what stopped me doing that elsewhere. So I don't know. I don't have the answers really, but I just know that that's a feeling I want to transfer to wherever I work. And we all have such different and unique environments for that. I mean, this place is great for that. Think Tank is amazing for that in terms of welcoming people. That's something I want to replicate in the places I work in, really.
Yeah. I would agree with that, and it's a piece of learning for us in Edinburgh, where there's a very integrated approach to the Warm and Welcoming initiative. We're expected to work in partnership, not just across libraries, community centres, advice, education, culture, but to actively seek out third sector partners. So there's such an opportunity to learn the best parts from each other about what we do well and what we can do differently. We're all asking ourselves why, apart from the obvious reasons of time and money and impetus, why haven't we done this before? Because it's so exciting actually to be able to have that joined up approach. And in Edinburgh, we're focusing on the campaign and the communications around what the resources are available in we've got locality areas, the 4 neighbourhoods of the city, and we're developing an online map to really make it crystal clear to people, where their local centres are and how to get to them within walking distance, because it's really important. We're going to move on to talk a little bit about the workforce and the cost of living impacts on the people that make up museums as part of our communities. But before we do, I just wanted to highlight thinking about encouraging each other to make our spaces welcoming. A resource that I came across just recently, and forgive me, some of you may know it by heart already, but Kids in Museums have developed a guide called, I think it's called Supporting Families During the Cost of Living Crisis. It's really available on their website, and it's absolutely brilliant. Top 10 tips on what to do in your space to make sure that families who most need it feel welcome, and some brilliant museum examples from Liverpool to Barnsley and everywhere in between. It's just wonderful. So do have a look at that if you haven't come across it. So we touched on the workforce. I've been really interested in the discussions that we've been having about cost of living, how so often we talk about it as if it's out there, as if the crisis and the issues are impacting our communities, as if our workforce and ourselves are not impacted, are not part of the community. And it's something that we're trying to address. And I wondered if either of you have got any examples of initiatives or changes to practice that is going on within museums to try and support each other, peer support and line manager and organisational support for each other through this time.
So from a line manager point of view myself, just making sure that you're checking in with your staff more regularly. There's quite an emphasis on using, resources that the employee provides. So we use Care First as our sort of counselling, but they sort of offer advice and assistance with anything that sort of concerns you. But also sort of little small things like changing the shift patterns, because my predecessor would do just short shifts to, cover lunch cover. But when every single member of staff had at least 20 minutes travel time to place of work, it's not really, in my mind, that's not ideal. So I've tried to implement, doing more a longer day, or doing so like 12 till 4, something to really assist with the business, but also to make it easier for them. They can have a longer day at work instead of travelling and then just doing a short shift, which, when petrol costs are concerned, it's quite impactful, really. I myself feel it, and then also I think I've not had any complaints yet, so...
That's a really good point. The commute can be an expensive business, particularly
and just offering things like tea and coffee, which always comes anyway, but making sure that everyone's catered for, really. Yeah, just little simple things that you wouldn't think of, and it's quite simple to make changes for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good example of just considering each other's positions. I mean, I have a mate, Sarah, who her go-to, you're probably watching this, Sarah, at home, thanks, but the go-to diagram is Maslow's hierarchy of needs for everything, both internally and externally. That's what you have to address first. We all need shelter, and we need to be warm, and we need to not be hungry, and all that. That's essential for all of us. And that's always stayed with me, that we all need that. I mean, you mentioned earlier about, how we're facing this off the back of COVID, which was just, such a hugely pressured situation for all of us. And I mean, I know I felt pressure and anxiety through that period that I'd never felt in any other situation before, in an almost overwhelming sense. And there were times at work where I felt really under pressure, just as a result of the situation we're all in. And what I was incredibly grateful to have at the time is that I have colleagues who were cool with me, who are all right with, they're supporting each other. And that's the best thing we can all be for each other, is to be good colleagues to each other, Because pressure manifests itself in so many different ways, so many unforeseen different ways. People who might just be snappy or just not getting there quite 100% with the work. Just be cool with each other. We're all under pressure. So I think that's probably the biggest thing to start with. And then it gets manifesting like what you're talking about, Olivia, about how it's practically manifesting how we support each other in different ways. So that's been the biggest thing for me to consider anyway.
Yeah. Being kind.
Yes.
Yeah, and being considerate. I think that's really important, isn't it? When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking that caring about it, caring about the impact and how it's affecting people differently is really important, isn't it? It's a starting point for, I think, the next stage, which is really important, which is talking about it, normalising the conversation about cost of living issues and how it's affecting everybody. Remembering that it does affect us all one way or another, either directly or indirectly, some more than others, and that there doesn't need to be a stigma about that. It's really important to consider the language we're using around it, I think, and also how people feel involved in that. Certainly in where I live, there's across the council, there's a rolling out of training that used to be just for practitioners in the social care team, of training called Money Counts. It's poverty awareness training, and really it's about not having all the answers, but it's about making sure everybody who works for the council understands how to talk about poverty and issues around budgeting, and how to talk about money in a inclusive way and managing money. And most importantly, I think of all, knowing exactly how to signpost people to the many sources of advice that are out there, and the experts who can help us all think about how we manage our affairs, particularly now. And for organisations, I guess I was thinking the main thing we can do is to recognise it, to talk sensitively, particularly at the moment when there's a lot of discussion around pay awards, a lot of restrictions on pay awards, but you'll have seen in the news, museum workers on strike, museum workers not going on strike because pay awards have been offered. And it's really important, I think, that organisations are sensitive to the fact that how we pay and providing appropriate levels of pay is absolutely essential. The MA has made a statement about this as well, about providing fair and appropriate pay, and I hope everyone is aware that the new salary survey results and guidance have been published now. So they're a really good start and endpoint for everybody in the sector to think about what it means to offer fair pay. It's something that recognises the challenging times that we're all living in. So it's on our website. I'm conscious we're probably running out of time. Simon's nodding. So very briefly, we were going to chat about historic houses and the impact there, but I think we'll save that for another session. Did anybody have any burning examples of practice that's going on around your areas or your museums to address cost of living, or any queries or follow-up questions on what we've been discussing? Yes, at the back.
You need to
Sure, Simon. Thank you.
Thanks. Just because the online audience can't hear unless we use the mic, so I'm running towards you.
Hello, my name's Ashley. I work at the Museum of Gloucester. We've been involved in the Holiday Activities Food Programme, so it's HAF. And this is a program that the government has rolled out for families on free school meals to provide art activities and other supplementary activities during the school holidays. I'm the educator at the museum, and this has dramatically shaped my education program. We've been supported by a third sector organisation who are embedded in a suburb that's quite far away from us. We've got a new network of families, we've met artists, makers, and I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It has really helped me to see what the people of Gloucester are like and what they need. And trialling our education program has just, it's proper co-creation, and it's been funded by the government. So I've been able to do stuff in the holidays that has meant that I can do stuff for free at other times. So I don't know whether the government has intentionally done it, but the artists in Gloucester are like living off this HAF program, so it's really amazing. But if you're not involved with it, please talk to your local county council, city councils about it, because you will be able to do it, and they'll pay you to do museum stuff.
Thanks so much. That's great.
That's a wonderful example, isn't it? Music to our ears. Thank you so much. And I think that just displays beautifully the kind of multiple benefits that can come from working in a collaborative way, particularly around something so relevant to our communities. Thank you for that example. That was great. Anybody else? Any examples you want to share? No? Okay. I know Simon's saying time to stop. So we'll say thank you. Please, everybody, stay in touch through your MA reps, through the MA staff team. Let us know what's happening in your museums and for your community so that we can support you and work with you to advocate for the sector and for our communities through this challenging time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Jill, Liv and Simon. That was a great start to the event. The cost of living, obviously something that affects all of us everywhere in our work and personal lives. Might be a bit depressing and difficult, but definitely needs to be talked about. So thanks for that. We're now going to move on for our next session, which is a panel session led by Sharon, the director of the MA. This session will drill down a little bit more into some of the issues that are affecting the sector, such as decolonisation, racism, sustainability, and wellness. So I'd like to welcome Sharon and her fellow speakers, Tan, Ramali, and Charlotte. Where is Charlotte? Oh, there you are, Charlotte. I didn't see you over there. To the top table to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Simon. And I was rapidly taking notes in that first session because we have the Minister in England, Lord Parkinson, has called a round table on Thursday to discuss impact of cost of living on the cultural sector, on museums, and we'll be giving evidence to that. So we're going to sweep up all of those examples of the things that museums are doing to support communities, but also some of the impacts on our communities and our institutions in that session. So this session is about addressing some of those big issues, as Simon said, but I just wanted to focus for a second on that conversation on cost of living and some of the hard realities that institutions and individuals and communities are facing. We had a really great session very early on the Friday morning of our conference in Edinburgh called A New Deal for Museums. And that was a session that had been put together by ourselves, the Museums Association and the English Civic Museums Network, to really talk about some of the pressing issues that museums are facing around funding, around sustainability, around operating models and business models, and to try and come up with some solutions. So we'll be taking that conversation forward. But I was struck that also yesterday we had a conversation with our English stakeholder group, which is our reps and others across the English regions. And it was a long, hard, difficult discussion because it was about exactly those issues. It was about the impact across a range of museums of the cost of living crisis, but also of the underlying problems of funding. Many of you will know that we did a survey last year of funding for, in particular, local and civic museums, which showed a trajectory of a 10-year decline of funding for those museums from local authorities. So we do need to come up with new innovative ideas. We need to come up with new solutions. And that discussion yesterday with stakeholders, covered what had happened at Nottingham Castle. You'll have seen the headlines there about the castle closing and people facing redundancy. But also that's been replicated across regions and across nations in the UK. Bury Museum has a very uncertain future at the moment, and 8 out of 10 staff there are facing redundancy. So it was a difficult conversation, but it was one that we needed to have. And there was also stories of hope. So many of you will also remember the museum closures of around 10 years ago in the period of austerity when, for example, Lancashire County Council closed 5 or 6 of its sites. So the head of service was in the meeting yesterday, and 6 of those sites have reopened, and those museums are hitting their visitor figures post-pandemic. So there's a story of hope, and that was brought about through collaboration at a local level with other arts organisations and with libraries, and a determination to save those historic buildings and collections for the communities in that area. And I was really struck by that conversation about a new deal at conference when Victoria Hollows, who's the chief executive of Paisley Museums, and they're undergoing a big capital transformation, which is going to be brilliant. It's going to be an amazing set of museums, sites there in Paisley. But they're also facing the same pressures that every local authority supported museum are facing. But Victoria said, we can't just be here to keep the lights on and to keep the doors open. We need to be about more than that. We need to be here for our communities. So the panel is going to think about some of those big issues, and that's what we're here to talk about. I'm sure many of you will have seen the news emerging from the weekend out of the Welcome Collection, which has said it's going to close its Medicine Man galleries to reassess them and reinterpret them with communities and in the light of empire and colony and conversations about race and medicine in the 21st century. And also the fantastic handing over of some of the Benin bronzes by the Horniman Museum to a delegation from Nigeria just last night. So these are the big issues that we're going to try and get to grips with on this panel. So I've asked the panel to introduce themselves and to answer, to say who you are and your job title, but to answer the question, the thing that inspired me to work in or with museums is. Charlotte, you first. I'll go for this end.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. So my name's Charlotte Holmes. I work here for Birmingham Museums Trust as a head of participation, and I do that as a job share with a colleague, Rachel Minot. But I'm also, when I'm not here doing that, I'm also a curator for the National Trust, one of their regional curators. But this is a Birmingham day today. The one thing, oh no, I've got 4. So very, very literally, there was an advert in the Evening Mail, which is a paper in Birmingham, which I don't say inspired me, but I probably hadn't even thought that I could work in a museum until I saw that advertisement, or my auntie saw that advertisement in a local paper for a training scheme that was happening over a summer, maybe 20 years ago. So that was perhaps the one practical thing. And then I would say perhaps my interest in ancient history came from I had a very religious upbringing. And we used to spend a lot of time reading the Bible and a lot of time looking at maps of the ancient world. And we also would go on trips to museums. And I probably wouldn't have gone on a trip to a museum if it hadn't been for that experience. So that's led to lots of different ways of thinking for me, but they were 2 things. And the final one would be my Auntie Pat, who used to work at Erdington Market and had an amazing collection of things. And so she really inspired me to join up connect that kind of love of the ancient world with kind of tangible objects and beautiful things. But if it hadn't been for the Evening Mail, I wouldn't be here today.
Thanks, Charlotte. And who doesn't love a family member who says that job's for you? You should definitely apply for that. Tan.
Hi, I'm Tan Sinden, and I'm an independent consultant and also director of White Lotus, which is a consultancy organisation supporting sector development in inclusion and innovation. So, quite a similar story to you, Charlotte. I came to know about museums and to have my eyes open about museums through the Museums Association's Diversify scheme. And that was a traineeship, and it came with it looking at collections, looking at exhibitions, and developing skills and experience to, I guess, I'm still sort of working in the sector, in and around and about and with the sector. So in some ways that was successful. And I was working in corporate health and safety as a stopgap really after studying. And my manager was like, I think I've seen this, and just across the road, it's a local museum and it's for you. I honestly have never been into that museum, and so it then opened my eyes up, and I had a great experience as a trainee. my interest, I guess, then is about, I had an interest in history because I had an interest in stories, and the story that were, that learning about what was in the past and what made us now, and here where we are. And in museums, I then discovered that was a way of sharing that and platforming that. And as through kind of my own development, self-reflection, exposure, I came to sort of see that actually there's lots of gaps missing in what stories we tell, how we tell stories, whose perspective we're privileging. And so that positioned me more into working, I guess, with communities, championing for equal partnership, equal kind of power and voice in how we collaborate and how we work with communities. And then now I'm sort of working across the culture and arts sector in inclusion, and I want to sort of support the sector development around this.
Thank you. It's always great to hear how sort of people have been inspired and then how their career journey pans out. Thank you. Ramli.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me here. I'm Dr. Ramli Jayawardena. I am the Community Participation Lead for the Waterfront Transformation Project at National Museums Liverpool, the heart of which is the redevelopment of the International Slavery Museum. And the thing that inspired me to be involved with museums, I'm sorry to be saccharine, but like it was my parents. So my parents came over to the UK as state-enrolled nurses. It was never a job that they wanted to do. It was simply a thing that they had to do, and they always encouraged me and my brother to do something we were passionate about. They didn't get that choice, unfortunately, but they always made time whenever they could to take us to museums and galleries. And so I suppose they really, really encouraged us to do something that we cared about. I think it would have broken their heart if I had joined the NHS and I had become a nurse. And so sort of years later, sort of after having gone to museums and galleries as a child, I was visiting another national institution with my dad, and we were on a tour, and there was just some very, very suspect interpretation of some of the collections, and I looked around and it was just me and my dad who were the only people of colour in the tour group. The person who was leading the tour was a white person. There was no context given about how these objects came into be the collection, and from the outside I was very much like, well, why is no one doing anything about this? And I thought, I'll do it. And obviously now I've joined the sector, I know that lots of people were working away behind the scenes, but really that sort of that childhood experience, but then that slow realization that actually that joy that you had as a child, it wasn't necessarily built for you. That's what's really led me to work in the sector and do the work that I do now at National Museums Liverpool.
Thank you so much. And the reason that I asked the panel to introduce themselves was because I wanted to hear in their own words who they are, how they were inspired, and what their journey has been. And I think we need to take a little grain of that, and we often do in museums, to think about what the community voice is, what the community interpretation is, what the alternative narratives are, and how we can centre them in the museum. So I asked the panel to think about what the big challenges are. So does anybody want to start on that conversation? The big challenges, how do we face up to them?
I can start us off. Well, we had a whole panel on cost of living crisis, and I think at the back of that as well, and with that, especially from emerging from the pandemic, is well-being both in communities and in our own workforce and organisation, because I think the effects through the pandemic of various degrees of traumas that everybody's sort of experienced to different levels, as well as this feeling of, this not just feeling, actual hardship that's you experience personally, you experience in communities, you can see it all around you, creates a real sense of, oblivion in some ways. As Sharon has spoken to, hope is that's what we've got. That is the essence of living, of kind of continuing, of being able to find new solutions, think differently, and connect and work more compassionately and kindly to create a new position and this new deal that you're sort of speaking to. And so there's all the societal challenges that is also, it's not separated from us as people, individuals working in organisational workforce. So there's workforce well-being, there's the impact of cost of living, there's still the unravelling of the effects of the pandemic, and funding, financial situation for museums and its collections. So I think that there's like the practical element and the operational element of challenges, and then there's also a sense of purpose. What is the new purpose for museums if we're still kind of in this grappling of that's the identity, that's where museums have sort of come from. It anchors in history, knowledge, telling of stories of who we were, and we're working, to kind of look at, well, what does that mean for who we are? But what does that mean in terms of freeing ourselves up into positioning a more hopeful future? One that addresses climate and people.
Mm-hmm. And Ramlee and Charlotte, you're both working in big city services where you're thinking about exactly that vision. How do you create new museums, new galleries? How do we censor people's voices in that? Do either of you want to kind of expand on that, Ramlee?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, thank you very much for that. I was also wrestling with this idea of, quite frankly, I think it could be distilled into this idea of the tension between internal and external on all levels. So, from the top, in terms of how funders have a say in what our museum services do, who gets, when there's private funding, who gets a say in what sponsorship we have, do our colleagues, do we represent the people they're supposed to be serving? Do the people who we are serving get a say in how we use our collections? And I think that all of that at National Museums Liverpool we're really addressing through our work on co-production. So I mentioned that I work on the Waterfront Transformation Project. That really stems from, as I said, the reimagining of the International Slavery Museum, and reckoning with Liverpool's history and its growth and its literal foundation on the transatlantic slavery economy, and the sites that we physically take up on the waterfront. How we can share that story in a far more comprehensive and meaningful way. But we know that story, that history, can't be sort of captured within just the four walls of the International Slavery Museum, however much we expand it and reimagining it. It has to expand into our Maritime Museum, it has to expand across our can engraving docks, which is a large area of public realm that we have, where ships would have been brought and serviced between voyages. It has to be told in our Museum of Liverpool building as well, and it has to be told across our smaller historic dockside buildings as well. And that's a lot of storytelling, that's a lot of narrative, and we can't do that ourselves. So the International Slavery Museum, the Maritime Museum redevelopment, and the can engraving dock is all being co-produced. And by co-produced, what I mean is that we are being led by communities at every level of decision making, in every aspect of decision making for the entire lifetime of the project. But again, thinking about the legacy and the sustainability of this model of working, we know that it can't just be captured within this one project and then we go back to an old sort of standard way of working. So we're working with the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at Leicester University to create a co-production framework specifically for National Museums Liverpool. And so we're using essentially the Waterfront Transformation Project as a case study, a way of figuring out a way of doing it whilst we're doing it. I also always say we're sort of, flying the plane as we're building the plane as we're flying it. And this framework is hopefully for us to understand what it actually means for us, not just what does co-production mean, but what does co-production look like in Liverpool? What does it mean to us, our identity as National Museums Liverpool? How is it being driven by our needs of this project, which are so sensitive, which are so urgent, but how can that inform the wider practice of National Museums Liverpool? And how can we make sure that this is embedded as our standard way of working going forward and doesn't just end the day that we open the new front doors to the new museums?
That's amazing to hear about that. And I think that's, when you see big city services that have tried to do one-off projects and exhibitions on co-production, that's great and that works for that moment in time. But the idea of embedding it is the gold dust, really, isn't it? And I think it probably does have to be on a city or region basis. Is that your experience, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think so. And it's certainly the challenge, one of the challenges I'm grappling with in this role. I think everything both Tan and Ranmali have spoken to really resonate with my experience and our experience here at Birmingham. So there's a couple of things. There's thinking about how the city is likely to change. So that's a challenge we're thinking about, and maybe some of my colleagues will talk to this a little bit more later. But as well as thinking about, we have a real challenge of our main city centre site, or one of our main city sites is currently closed. It's going to reopen. So how do we do that? We'll do that using lots of co-curation as a methodology, but also what happens as our city centres change. We need to keep them thriving as perhaps retail patterns change in our city centres, but also thinking about the city as a whole and how we spread our energy to more dispersed models of provision. I don't really know the answer to how we make these models of co-curation truly sustainable. I do have a bit of a challenge of, over the last, we've spoken from austerity through to the COVID crisis, through to now the cost of living crisis. It's been a really tough 12, 13, however many maths, so my strong point. It's been a few years. It's been a challenging few years. And in that model and in that time, we've seen obviously our funding decrease. I wonder, have our models of visitation really changed in terms of who we're attracting? How can we truly be more equitable? I have a hope that our museums will be much better when they're co-curated, and we've already seen a little bit of that in Birmingham and other places. But is that going to change who visits and how they experience our site? And also, how do we make that, so I don't know the answer to that question. And the other question I'm facing is then, how do we operationalize all these ideas? Who pays the price? We've got a smaller workforce. We have smaller resources. We are now, it feels like, asking more people to contribute, but we have no more resource to make that happen. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are really, really, really stretched in the workforce. And I don't know how we can really hold some of those relationships responsibly in that context. So we're going to have to do something really different, and perhaps we're going to have to do perhaps less and be more focused if we want to achieve some of these issues around equity. So a lot of challenges. Sorry, Sharon. That was a really long list and no solutions.
I think it's really interesting to reflect on, because I was casting my mind back to, the banking crash and then the kind of the repercussions of that in terms of the economy and austerity and the impact that had on museums and galleries. And I remember a minister at the time in England saying, we've got to do more with less. And I thought, that can't be right. It's impossible when museum workers and those that work in and with museums are already really passionate and dedicated and want to do their best with their collections, with their communities. And I think it is about doing different with less. And so it's, what are the priorities then? What do you put at the top of the list?
Because what I have to reflect on, and I have to maybe, I don't know if congratulate is probably a bit too strong a word, but isn't it amazing though that the sector in this 10 years has really, we've had less funding and we've really tried to be more socially engaged. There's been a huge effort. So I think we should give ourselves credit for that. But yeah, what has to give in this new equation? What do we prioritize? I mean, it has to be people, I would say, but that's quite easy to say and quite hard when you're looking at the balance sheet, both as an employee then as a trustee. I don't know how we make that sum work. I really don't.
Any further thoughts on that? I'm not asking for solutions, that's impossible. It would be amazing if we could get one easy solution.
I mean, for me at the moment, thank you, it really is about, like, I hear and really, really strongly resonate with those points, Charlotte. For me at the moment, it's that we're in that transition period, and so it's about working with our colleagues who do understand, who are really who really advocate the need for co-production and a change in working practices. But as you say, they're already overburdened, overstretched, and we're coming out of an era where they feel like, perhaps their work isn't as visible or valued as it can be and it needs to be. It's a perpetual, dilemma, isn't it? So for me, in my messaging and how we actually make this successful and how we actually gain that buy-in is by really highlighting the work that people are already doing and understanding, well, there's, we didn't get all of this funding to create a whole co-produced project and a whole framework because we've never done it before. Actually, this builds on decades of experience, and it comes way before me. I've only been in the job since like March this year. This is built on the foundations that our colleagues have built over decades. And so how do we highlight that? How do we encourage that, signpost to the good work that's already being done, and be like, well, this is all we're here to do as me and my team as project team, to be like, we're here to support you do more of that work better and to feel better held and better equipped in that work, and for us to work with you to embed that into your business as usual workload rather than seeing it as an added extra. And so that's sort of how I'm trying to work through it at the moment.
I think that was Victoria Hollow's point in that conversation. It can't just be business as usual, keep the doors open, keep the lights on. It's got to be embedded practice, working with communities. Simon, have I got time to do Q&A from the audience? 10 minutes, okay. Are there any questions for the panel about the new models, about how we embed that community engagement and practice? If not, we're going to carry on the conversation from the top table. You can have a think. I will ask again in a few minutes. So we've heard about some of those challenges. Can you give us some examples of like the really kind of nitty-gritty work? Because it's one thing saying we've got a framework, we've got academic partners. What does that actually mean? What does it mean when you arrive on the dockside or in the heart of the community or on site in a museum? Tan?
Oh, I was going to...
I thought you were going for a mic grab.
I was going to pass the mic. I think to speak to more practical examples of your day-to-day, just to kind of add to that sort of conversation going before, in terms of looking at models and in terms of not being we haven't got the solutions quite just yet, where we've got practices that are happening, that's kind of, and that brave space that's being created and needs to continue to be encouraged to do that. And I think it's the interrogation of structures, like the structure that we have and continue to have replicates still a hierarchy of order of things. And quite to what Charlotte was speaking to, this sort of almost post-growth kind of analogy to the climate and society is like, what does a model of an organisation that changes, you know, from this, what it's existing, look like? And I think that kind of, what do we let go of then? So I think there's some big, brave questions that the sector needs to kind of really look at. I think a lot of, when I did some work previously, I think quite a big of concerns around sort of collections, and when we're looking at sustainability and researching into that, and that sort of question around, well, how can we sustain everything with the funding? And it's a, well, is that the right question that we should be asking ourselves? So I think start interrogating the questions that we ask ourselves.
Thank you. That's really interesting because, yeah, it is the hierarchies that sometimes we have in our collections and the structure of the organisation then do reflect kind of where the power and often the funding is. And that needs to be subverted, I think, if we're going to embed. Ramlee?
I suppose I'm thinking about very, very practical. You said, what does that look like day to day? Day to day, it's filling out new supplier forms and trying to book catering, and like it's very much that sort of administrative side of it that actually I'm finding is the thing that needs to be deconstructed right now, because it's all well and good saying, you know, we're going to be far more closely integrated with our communities, we're going to be informed by, you know, and led by what people need and what they want, sort of on a local, national and international basis. But actually, you know, you talked about, you know, paying people to be part of that process. If they're not getting paid on time, then it's not working. They're not going to want to work with us going forward. And so as part of the framework, it's not just sort of external people, you know, front of house roles and teams that are testing the framework. Actually, we think it's really important that every directorate across the museum organisation tests out this model to see if really, you know, when we talk about being visible, when we talk about being human or transparent, that actually it's not just, we're not just paying lip service, but actually our policies and our procedures match up to that as well. And so, you know, at the moment we're testing with our finance team about, you know, when someone works with us, they might not seem like barriers to us because we are creating those processes, but actually from someone externally, when they work with us and, you know, we ask them to do, you know, an IRA, not an IRA, oh God, not IR35 form, on like a new supplier form, and ask about their tax status and all of this, like those are all just barriers to people really being on board with us, and it takes focus away from the work and the conversation, and really the follow-up conversations for months on end are, you know, where are we at with this payment rather than where are we at with this conversation. And so for me, that's very much, you know, understanding how our projects and our displays, all very well and good being co-produced at this point, but really the focus of the work has to be on our internal structures, and that's what the day-to-day looks like at the moment, I think.
That's so interesting, and I think actually as the Museums Association we could do more to support, because I know other institutions are grappling with that. What do you pay? How do you pay? What if people are on benefits and they can't receive a payment? All of those questions. I know we've done a little bit of work on it. Sarah Briggs, who is on our staff, has done some of that work, and we've got some of that online, but we need to do more to support HR functions and others, because that's the barrier to getting the work done. Charlotte, what about in your case?
So what are we practically doing? So I think this summer we had a brilliant summer over at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. We're only open temporarily, and again, I don't know, Rachel, if you're going to talk to this later, but just to say that it was really wonderful to see that change in power just actually happen, because we actually had the opportunity we needed to rehang, and so we had an opportunity to put community voices right in the centre of the museum and to re-emphasise that the collection belongs to the city. So that was really wonderful just to see that happen, and to see spaces truly created in partnership with a community expert, whether that be in Birmingham rave scene or in the anti-racist anti-racist movement in the city and across the country actually be able to share their archives. So for me, that was something lovely, tangible, practical. We tested lots of different methods of co-curation throughout that, and we're evaluating those now. So then the kind of the flip side of how we can focus is then to really do. It sounds so obvious, but actually, how often do we really evaluate robustly, and do we actually action? Because often we evaluate in a way that promotes what we're doing to the funder. So we obviously still have to maintain that. Well, we don't obviously have to continue to do that. Maybe the really fundamental thing is to understand what worked, what didn't, what needs to change, and do that even if that's going to be really uncomfortable. And so we're doing lots of learning now as a result of some of those tangible actions. So to slow down. And another thing is probably we're considering at the moment, because we've had to, our volunteering, all our structures really shrank over lockdown. So we're having to rebuild those slowly. Again, because of financial pressures, we haven't had people in post. So lots of things are kind of frozen. But there is a real challenge in that of holding the weight of that operation with a small team, but then thinking, okay, now's the time to rebuild and rebuild differently. So how can we shift volunteering from being quite a nice activity that supports our outputs to being something that really does build kind of social capital across Birmingham's wider population, so it isn't just the usual people volunteering, and that people truly get something out of that experience. And obviously lots of our volunteers do, that's not to say that they don't. We benefit greatly from their knowledge, but is there an opportunity to do something in that area, but that isn't exploitation? That isn't just saying our workforce is smaller, so that's quite a challenge ethically, but that's something we're exploring. So doing lots of research and just trying to slow down a little bit so that we can try and use our very limited resources perhaps a bit more wisely is where we're at, I would say.
Okay, I see Simon is approaching the...
There's a couple of questions online.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah, fantastic. Let's take them.
So there's a couple about ethics and stuff, but they're probably not the easiest ones. But there's one that says, do you know of any good examples of sort of co-curation work in rural museums or environments? Another, a bit more sort of basic, about how do you find community groups to work with? Where do you start?
Does anybody want to take those? Obviously, if you've got answers to those online questions in the audience, feel free to chip in. But does anybody on the panel want to do so? Where do you start with finding the community groups that you want to work with, or any experience of rural?
I can take the community group one. I hope so. Thanks. In terms of figuring out who you want to work with, I think what we did when my team, the community participation team, came on board, we did, community mapping. We understood what the relationship landscape was, who we had worked with, who we were working with, where those relationships were left off, what the last point of contact was, how, and getting an idea of what that meant sort of demographically. Were we focusing very locally, which we have. We are heart of the work that we do with the International Slavery Museum, especially, is with our L8 community, sort of a stone's throw away from us in Toxteth. But really, we need to represent the Liverpool City region, and then obviously we are the International Slavery Museum, so we have to have that national representation and international representation as well. So for us, it was really understanding what the landscape was when we moved into the project and what the role was, and then understanding, well, who do we know is missing? How can we map, the demographics, the key groups that we know are missing, that we're not working with at the moment, and then how do we create space? How do we create opportunity for those people that we don't even know that we're missing out on at the moment come in to those conversations as well? And so I don't have like a very easy practical answer for you in terms of how to do that. There are lots of different systems that you can use. Obviously we use our CRM system, but really is often it's boots on the ground. It's basing yourself outside of the museum. It's, you know, we've got members of my team go and work in different community organisations 1 day a week, 1 day a month, just so that they can get that passing traffic. They can understand who's coming in and out of those spaces, who's using those spaces that aren't. We don't see those same people coming through our doors as well. And, you know, I think in the previous panel we talked a lot about, you know, the sort of working with third sector organisations. I'm trustee of a food bank organisation as well, and I've learned a lot from sort of that work that I can, you know, use and utilise in museums as well. But it's really understanding where people go if they're not coming to museums, and if they're not coming to into community spaces, where are they? They're, you know, they're in schools, they're in GP surgeries, they're in shopping centres. Like they're not, you know, we can't stay where we are and then create pathways hoping that people will use them back to us. We need to also expand our network and our understanding of the landscape that we're working in by moving out and sort of being open to those opportunities and those connections as well.
Thanks, Ramlee. I know there are examples on the Museums Association website. If you look under the Museums Change Lives campaign strand, then there are examples from rural museums there, not specifically about how you find your partners, but certainly of examples of co-production. I know there's been examples in the Highlands in Scotland as well, and in more rural parts of Wales. I don't know if Simon's standing there because he's got another question, or he's just kind of going like, you've got to stop now. Just want to do the last one, which I did say I'd ask the panel, which is, what are our moments of joy? Because I think it's always good to finish on a point of joy.
Here we go. I really struggled, Jared. But yeah, the Commonwealth Games, seeing so many people come to our city was incredibly joyful, and the pride that we all had. So, and the museum being part of that was definitely a big moment for me.
That was a beautiful moment of joy. It really was. Okay. Huh?
The connection, the kind of like the unlocking of like understanding, imagination and connection, that when I go into museum spaces and discover something that either makes me think critically or think critically of, it's enjoy that.
Thanks. For me, it's my colleagues. I get to work in a phenomenal team of women from the global majority, and I never thought that would really happen. And I get so much motivation and critique from them every day. So yeah, they really, really do inspire me to do better work every day.
Brilliant. And I think, you know, the best colleagues and friends are the ones that give you the love, inspiration and critique. Thank you so much. What an amazing panel. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for all four speakers for an amazingly thoughtful session. That's fantastic. I was reading today, they've released some information about the latest census, which is interesting, stuff about sort of changing communities to do with religion, and I think Birmingham's mentioned as a super diverse city, which I know is a bit of a cliche, but I think it is interesting that the census has flagged these things up. So in a terrible link, another thing that's changing obviously is the climate, which brings us to our next session. During the summer, the MA launched its Museums for Climate Justice campaign. It's a campaign designed to help museums raise awareness, champion change, and embed climate action across all that they do. Work in this area included sessions at our annual conference in Edinburgh. There was a Museums Journal special on climate justice in September. There will be a Museum Essentials online learning course coming out in the new year as well, so look out for that. And there's lots of resources on our website. But also we're doing things at our members' meetings, including this one, where Rachel and Lucas from Birmingham Museums Trust are going to be talking about, well, Rachel's going to be talking about the work the Trust is doing on the Climate Action Plan, and then Lucas is going to be discussing the organisation's public engagement work in the area of the climate crisis. So, Rachel, I can see. Lucas, I don't know. Is that okay? Brilliant. Excellent.
Hi everybody.
So I'm Rachel Cockett, Director of Development for Birmingham Museums Trust. And my colleague Lucas Large is our Natural Science Curator and will be talking after I've given an introduction to our Climate Action Pledge and Climate Action Plan. I thought I'd start with a dramatic climate activist image. There's quite a lot of these about. When I was Googling to find a good one, I picked this one because it fits the slide aspect ratio very nicely. What's quite interesting is when I Google for images, I used to get very high-res ones, but these are all videos because they're being sort of filmed and sent out live by the activists, which is quite a recent change. I just wanted to, I suppose, highlight, we're talking often about social justice and activism, and often as public spaces, we're often the subject of other people's activism. And it might be quite an interesting thing about how we feel about that on an individual basis, and of course, what our organisation might feel about that, and the people who have to respond to this, both in terms of cleaning up and in terms of the sort of PR around it. So I probably should just say, Birmingham museums do not allow or encourage criminal damage to our buildings or objects. But and what I think is quite interesting is we do celebrate some of the people who have in the past damaged some of our paintings or objects. So I just think there's some interesting thinking to do there around what's happening now and what's happened with the suffragettes. So you've got a plaque here to Bertha Ryland, who was a Birmingham suffragette who damaged this painting. And you can see, maybe able to see on the slides, the damage down here. In 1914. So we put this plaque up a couple of, it was pre-COVID, so a few years ago, to celebrate Bertha Ryland and what she did, and that's in our round room, one of the biggest galleries in the Museum and Art Gallery. And we're also selling suffragette weekly planners, which tell you to revolutionise your week. So I'm not sure if that's what the suffragettes fought for, but I found it quite amusing when I was thinking what I wanted to say. So last year, Birmingham Museums quite actively put up a climate pledge. We've had something called an environmental and sustainability plan since 2012. Initially, I think we probably pulled together a plan because our Arts Council NPO, or MPM as it was then, contract said we had to have something called that. But it has become a very strong part of our organisational ways of working, thinking about how we might save energy, reduce carbon, reduce greenhouse gases. And we've been very actively working to do all those things since 2012, but 2021 was the first time we actually made an active sort of public pledge. And you can sort of see it here. You can also see it in our Changing Planet Gallery, which is downstairs in the think tank here. It was worked up with staff across the organisation. So until relatively recently, a lot of the work that we'd articulated in our action plan was really focused on the facility staff, the collection care staff, so the very obvious sort of people who were in charge of energy use and managing the buildings and looking after the collections. But at the same time, a lot of the learning and engagement staff were already doing quite a lot of work in terms of engaging the public on climate change, what they might be able to do about it. So it was really important that the pledge was worked up with staff across the organisation. Otherwise, it tended to get very focused on things like changing light bulbs and being more efficient in, say, using our air conditioning. Very important things, but not necessarily the sort of things that engage people greatly or not for very long. Since we've done the climate pledge, I've found, as the person who leads on fundraising for Birmingham Museums, a lot more funders are now saying, have you got a sustainability plan? Or have you got any public statements? And I'm finding that question just in the last few months more and more, and suddenly I can actually link to this online and share an action plan. And just having something online that you can link to immediately is already making a difference to what I do. I'm not having to pull anything together, it's just there and public. So just in brief, our pledge has 3 principles which are aimed at to help us become carbon neutral by 2040, we're saying at the moment. Lots of organisations are saying 2030. We're not sure if we can have the resource to make 2030, so we don't want to make any false claims. And the principles are guided by a sort of 4-point plan. So, and just in simple terms, improving our buildings is one of the biggest things, and probably one of the most difficult things. We have a selection of buildings. They all have their issues. Most of them are historic. This is the least historic. It's also quite difficult to manage the environment. Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold, sometimes it leaks. It doesn't matter whether a building is new or old, it seems to leak. So whilst we do everything we can, we've got renewable electricity across the sites, we do as many lighting improvements, water saving, etc., the things that I'm sure lots of people are doing. The areas where we can really make some difference and talk to the public about that difference, and I do think it's where working with the public where we can make the most difference, because we can reach a lot more people and give them things that they can go away and do and think about and learn about. And certainly here at the think tank, maybe they go away and they get into different areas of science so they can really have a huge impact on, a positive impact on climate change. But the green spaces are really important to us, and Lucas will talk about this a lot more, in terms of introducing people to their environment, to nature, to changes in nature and what they might mean and how you might measure them, how you might improve them or diversify your environment. It's a very hard to read emissions map. So, but that's okay, because actually it's not very useful to us at the moment. We find it very difficult to collect data across of all our sites consistently, and by data I mean how much electricity we're using, how much gas we're using, how much water we're using. We've got smart meters, we've put quite a lot of time putting those in. We changed suppliers recently for some of our sources of energy, and some of the new suppliers took away the smart meters, even though they were ours. So we're continually fighting to just actually have the data and report the data. So it's been an ongoing issue for us as an organisation, is just actually producing consistent data to share internally and with our funders. But clearly it's something we do keep working on. So this graph from year to year can look very different, but we can't tell if that's because we have got all the data in there or whether there's some data missing. I think what I'm saying is this is important, but what's more important is the number of the public we can reach. We've done a few very practical things around changing our ways of working. So all our cafes use have removed single-use plastic. We use, sustainably sourced packaging across all aspects of the business, the shop, sustainable materials in exhibitions build, and that's something that the technical and exhibitions teams are working on and continue to work on. We've placed an electric vehicle. That's what happens if you buy an electric vehicle and put it on our internal intranet. Just I nick it for a PowerPoint. And we just, again, talk about our journey to becoming more sustainable with sort of practical examples as much as possible. Partnership working, as a third area. We won't do anything if we don't work with others. Just popped a few of our partners up there, so Too Good To Go about getting effective use of what would essentially be food waste. We obviously work with suppliers, and we require our suppliers to have their own action plans or sustainability plans. One of the biggest areas and where we struggle is because we are dependent on partners. Again, in terms of recycling our waste, we're dependent on Veolia, who do waste management in Birmingham. Their ambition is to receive 25% recycling. Our ambition can't go any higher than that because we're tied to what they do. And so again, they won't change until government policy says they need to change. So there are areas where you'll do as much as you can, but it does come down to having to be a sort of a policy change. And obviously we can push for that, and we all need to push for that. And then this is really the best example, is leading by example, and it is our public programmes where we reach the most people and talk to visitors, inspire them to make their own choices, engage with local school children, local communities. We have a group of young climate campaigners that we work with and who input into the Changing Planet Gallery, and we continue to work with those young people. And we have a significant number of climate-focused sort of engagement programs, creating citizen scientists, BioBlitz events. We're working on Operation Earth and the Urban Nature Project with the Natural History Museum. I don't know if anybody else is working on that, but really that's the way I think we can reach these people. So we will continue to work on improving our buildings, despite the best effort of our buildings themselves and some of our suppliers to make that difficult for us. But it's the public, at the moment, sort of 300,000 people coming in a year that we can reach, and they can obviously reach, again, everybody they know and they work with. I'm going to hand over now to Lucas, who's going to tell you a lot more about his work and how he works with the public across some of our sites and how that links back to some of our collections as well.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, as Rachel said, I'm the Curator of Natural Science here at Birmingham Museums Trust. And one of the main activities that I've been doing over the past few years is going out into our heritage properties. So we have this whole series of different green spaces around the city, and talking to people about the wildlife that can be found there. So we do a series of BioBlitzes every year. If you don't unfamiliar with the idea, a BioBlitz is basically where you try to record as much wildlife as possible in a particular area over a set period of time. That concept is quite flexible, so it can be almost any size of area over any period of time. But it's a fantastic opportunity to engage the public and to help them understand what wildlife can be found in our sites, and also some of the sort of complexities of the natural world. So it's not just what can be found, but how these species sort of interact and what they need to be able to survive and thrive. So the challenges that face the natural world are all interconnected. So biodiversity loss is being accelerated by climate change, not just here, but around the world. And also habitat loss makes these the populations of the surviving animals more vulnerable to climate change and sort of changes in weather patterns. And this is one of our heritage properties, Blakesley Hall. Got some lovely gardens there, and this is a real opportunity to show people sort of what a wildlife friendly place looks like, and hopefully encourage people to adopt similar wildlife friendly practices in their own gardens. If you've probably noticed that there's been an increasing trend to make outdoor spaces very hostile to wildlife. So the people are installing plastic lawns, getting rid of trees and shrubs, paving over front gardens, and that's one of the reasons why it's reflected in changes like the decline in sparrows, so a species that was once almost ubiquitous throughout sort of urban and suburban gardens is now becoming fairly rare. And this is a couple of the things that we found at Blakesley Hall this year. So there's a lovely hairy-footed flower bee, and then this much rarer common mourning bee, which is a parasite on it. So it actually lays its eggs inside the nest of the hairy-footed flower bee, and then the young feed on the pollen and nectar that the flower bees collected. So these are one of the first species to emerge in spring, so they're very much affected by the warming pattern that's been happening with the earlier and earlier springs occurring. And that means that they're quite vulnerable to mismatches between their own emergence and the emergence of their food. So if they start flying in spring and there aren't any flowers, then they won't be able to survive. And one of the ways that we've found to try and help encourage a sort of healthy population of the flower bees is to make these things called cob bricks. So each bee kind of nests in a slightly different place. You'll be probably familiar with the bee hotels, and they're very good at encouraging species that nest in wood, but lots of bees are ground nesting bees. So the hairy-footed flower bees particularly like nesting in a cob, which is sort of mixture of sand and organic material. And so we had a nice cob bee brick making workshop in Blakesley Hall over the summer. And this is another species that we found over at Blakesley Hall. This is the chocolate mining bee. But what's unusual about this one is it's been infected by another parasite. You can see just poking out of the back there, and there's a close-up on the right. This is a strange insect called Stylops, and that's the female, and it lives its entire life inside the body of the bee. Again, it's much rarer than its host, so for this strange creature to survive, it needs a good population of the host bee. I mean, this is one where it's not particularly fussy about where it nests. It can nest in any kind of bare patch of ground, but it does need a good supply of flowers during its flight period, which is from April to June. And one of the things I just thought I'd mention is honeybees. So that's one of the things that's kind of emerged as a sort of meme almost, that people have thought, oh, I want to save the bees, let's encourage honeybees. But that's an example of what seems to be good can actually cause problems. So honeybees are fine as long as you appreciate them for what they are. They're domestic animals, a bit like having chickens or something like that. So keeping chickens won't save wild birds, and keeping honeybees won't do anything particularly for wild bees, and can even cause some harm. And there's certainly evidence that their very high density of honeybees can actually compete with wild bees for pollen and nectar, so it can actually kind of reduce the wild bee population. And these are a couple of examples of hoverflies, and they're a really good group that you can encourage people to record, and because they're fairly charismatic for flies, they're fairly easy to recognise. You can identify them most of them from photographs. And this is because they've been quite well recorded for a long time throughout the country. They're also a group where the effects of climate change are quite clear. So particularly, they're not really affected by the overall warming, but they are affected by droughts, particularly recurrent droughts. So particularly this year, you'll remember we had a very extremely dry summer. So all the way from March through to the end of September, there was hardly any rain at all. And the larvae of the hoverfly need quite damp conditions to live in. So it's been very clearly shown that the recurrent droughts, the increasing amount of droughts caused by the warming climate, have really reduced the numbers of many species of hoverfly. And another thing that's quite good to get involved with is the City Nature Challenge. So that happens in spring every year. It's an international programme, and uses the iNaturalist website. And that's a way of sort of getting beyond the museum site. So the whole of the West Midlands takes part, and lots of cities around the country as well. And we've been quite successful here. So we were #1 in terms of like observations like last year. But it's quite interesting if you do actually look at the map of where people have been recording wildlife. There are some areas that are quite well covered, but there are also some notable gaps. It's interesting to see sort of where the gaps are, and there might show that there are places that we need to make more effort to engage people with wildlife and the recording of wildlife. And this is an example of one of our insect collections. We have an amazing and huge insect collection, about 125,000 different individual pinned insects. And this is a thing that it's an amazing resource, but it's one that is quite difficult to make use of in terms of like looking at climate change and how that affects us, because when these collections were assembled, the idea of climate change wasn't really around, and people didn't collect the insects with this kind of the future in mind and what we might want to use insect collections for. But they're an amazing resource, and even if we can't necessarily use them for looking at, for example, population trends and how the warming climate is affecting the wildlife, they are a fantastic tool to get people to learn about insects, and also so for example, how to identify them. But that's definitely an area where we can do more work to engage people with these incredible collections. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Lucas and Rachel. That's really interesting. I'm sure lots of you have got natural history items in your collections. So we've got a break now of about half an hour. For those of you who want to talk to Craig, he's over here. I think he's probably staying there. There's various other MA staff dotted about the room. If you want to talk to Sophie about membership, Sophie's over there. And we've also got people from the Esme Fairman Collections Fund who are going to speak later anyway. So there's still some refreshments in there, I think. So do take advantage of that. For the online audience, you've also got half an hour, obviously. So we'll see you back here at 1:15.
What's going on with that?
Oh, I think that was
Old message.
yeah. Don't mess with it. Okay.
Lots more. So welcome, Sarah.
Hello. Thanks, Simon, for that introduction. I'm going to introduce Ruchika for the second part of the talk, but I'm just here today. I'm the Collections Development Officer at the Museums Association, and I'm here to talk to you about the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund and the way that we are making changes to it for 2023. If you've applied to the fund in the last few years, you've probably spoken to me, and if you're going to apply in the future, you no doubt will speak to me. The fund will look a little different, as I said, but if you weren't familiar with it in its current form, I'll just explain that the Museums Association administer the fund on behalf of the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and we have done for the last 11 years. We spent the last year thinking about how the fund can best support the sector, and how we can also make that fund align with the Esme Fairbairn Foundation's renewed priorities, in particular their priority around creative, confident communities. So how we did that is we looked at other funding to see what was available in the sector. We listened to what our grantees had to say about the difference that the funding can make to them. And additionally, we commissioned research from 5 separate networks across the sector, looking at how the fund can support different themes and topics, ranging from things like collections development to climate crisis and anti-racism. So through this review, we heard that you need to build long-term sustainable relationships with your partners. But in order to do this well, you need to have long-term sustainable relationships with funders, us being one of them. So this is what we're trying to achieve with this next iteration of the Collections Fund, and we're trying to provide as much flexibility as possible. So we are still sharing the learning from the grant as much as we possibly can, so that the wider sector can benefit from best practice and lessons learned. But for now, I'll just share... Oh, I'm going the wrong way on the slides. Got it upside down. There we go. I'll just share some key headlines of the fund. So we're offering grants of up to £100,000 for next year, and we anticipate funding about 12 to 14 museums a year. There's no changes to the way that we sort of timetable the fund. So there'll still be 2 rounds of funding a year in spring and autumn, and we'll still operate a 2-stage process with a short expression of interest form followed by a fuller second stage application for those shortlisted. We'll still encourage you to get in touch and talk to me about your ideas before you apply. My contact details are on the first slide. I'll give them at the end again. Perhaps one of my colleagues can share them online for those of you tuning in remotely. But I'm also here at the end of the session, so if you want to have an informal chat with me, then I'm very happy to talk about your ideas. I'll always try and ask you the questions that I think our selection committee will ask. So I think I'm quite a good sounding board as a first step for your idea. But to go into a little bit more detail about what the fund's going to look like next year, let's first look at what's staying the same. So the basic premise of the fund is still the same. It's still the Collections Fund. So that means that we'll still be supporting the collections of accredited museums. So we're still looking for work that uses existing collections in ways that improves our understanding of them and increases their use. I usually say to applicants that they should be able to articulate a collection's benefit to the work, and this advice remains the same. Secondly, we've always said that the fund was about bringing collections closer to people, and over the years this has come to mean more. So 11 years ago, it was much more about accessibility to collections. There was lots of digitisation. We've moved and we've seen a lot more projects around participatory practice. We're going even further with that now. So what we're looking for is for organisations to improve their inclusion and participatory practice with the work that they do. So we're looking for work that's underpinned by strategic aims around diversity, equity and inclusion, and that helps an organisation further these. We're very happy to see work that is community-led, but at the very least we'd like to see community groups, partners and stakeholders given prominent roles in the work.
We still recognise that individual museums will be at different starting points. So just as we have done in 2022, we'll ask you questions about your participatory practice, and we'll use tools like our Power to the People framework to enable you to sort of map where you are so that you can monitor your progress and see an improvement in your participatory practice throughout the lifetime of your project. What we're interested in is how the work will improve your practice and what it offers your partners or our participants. And I always ask the question, what's in it for them with your participants? And that's a question I think you should ask yourselves as soon as you think about working with somebody else. Why should they work with you? Why would they want to? So essentially, we're looking for museums and community partners to find ways to work together using collections. So because of this, there's some quite important changes to the fund, which I think you'll be quite excited about. I know we are. So because our people focus has moved much more towards diversity, equity and inclusion, we're looking for museums that have strategic goals around this. Now, I've been telling museums for years and years that in this era of sort of short-term project funding, you should always make your short-term projects work towards your larger strategic goals in order to get the best use out of it. And the strongest applications that we get are the ones that do this. So we're really just embedding this approach more deeply, but we are also moving slightly away from a project-focused approach. We still expect to see applications around themes such as climate crisis, decolonisation, anti-racism, social justice and health and well-being. But because we expect to see the work being truly participatory, we know that these topics, outputs and workflows can be really hard to define in advance. So because of this, the biggest change we're implementing is that the funding will now be able to cover core costs. So essentially, we're handing over more trust to you so that you can hand over even more trust to your partners and participants. So we won't be asking for detailed budgets, but instead we'll be agreeing a set of funding outcomes with you that reflect your strategic plans. We're hoping that we anticipate that the work will benefit small and medium-sized museums the most, because we think that figure of £100,000 can make the most difference to those organisations. That's not to say you can't apply if you're bigger, you absolutely can. So that's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Collections Fund before I hand over for a real-life example of the sort of work that we fund and the sort of work that I think would very successfully get funded under the new criteria. But here are some key dates for your diary. So the full guidance is now published, it's all on our website, and that means that applications are officially open. But you'd have to be super keen to rush to get that application into me now, because the deadline for the first stage is not until, well, the slide says March. We've actually just changed that, giving you a little bit more time. So it's the 5th of April 2023 is the deadline for the first round of funding. So there's loads of time to work on your ideas and loads of time to have those conversations with me around them. And then there'll be another deadline for another round of funding next year in September. So do take a note of my contact details if you want to get in touch with me later, or as I say, grab me a bit later on today and I'll very happily talk you through the fund. But now I'd like to introduce Ruchika from the University of Cambridge Museums, who's going to talk to you a bit about their Legacies of Empire project.
Thank you, Sarah. All right. I do apologize, the font has gone a bit haywire. It's my fault for choosing a slightly fancy font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the kind of relationship my team has with the university museums. I'll tell you about our community work, the way in which we're developing relationships, and then sort of tell you a little bit about how we're working around workforce development. So I'm a communities coordinator. I lead the community engagement for the Legacies of Empire and Enslavement project that the university museums are doing. We're 8 museums, and we also have the Botanic Gardens. So because these museums, some of which are embedded in departments and some of which are smaller museums, we have quite a contentious relationship because, obviously, the university. So a lot of the times when we are developing partnerships, sometimes it's really great to be a university museum, but then it also has that hampering side effect of being a very exclusive, elusive space that communities don't always feel welcome in. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So, just a bit of our key project outcomes. So one of our core sort of outcomes is to develop how we engage with community collaborators, particularly kind of strengthening links that we've had. So with our different museums, we sit as a partnerships team and we work within the 8 museums. So in many ways, we are a part of all of the museums, but we also sit slightly separately. So again, it's a really interesting team to be a part of. And within that team itself, we have a few members who solely focus on the Legacies project. So the way in which we work is we develop partnerships, we bring in projects, we also sit and fulfill capacity across all the museums because, again, a lot of people are stretched out and some of our teams are really, really small. So the second project outcome is to develop confidence with our existing staff, and I'll talk to you a little bit in more detail about that. But it's been quite a challenging journey to get a lot of our staff members on board as we look at our collections with our complex histories. Sometimes they are confidence building that we have to work through formal routes of workforce development, but sometimes it's just having coffee chats, which is great for me, but also trying to figure out different ways in which we can hit different teams within the museums and not leave anyone behind. And as a result of enhanced engagement with communities, we are trying to ensure that a wider breadth of our collections are also explored. So to date, what we focused on is new research. So we've got our research and engagement fellow who's part of networks. We have research that's looking at decolonization within Australian mammals, and there's lots of very exciting stories coming out. But a lot of these stories are also, again, happening behind the scenes. And when we do have conversations with people, it is, what is the university doing? We've also just recently gone public with our program because we've had to follow the University of Cambridge's inquiry into its legacies of enslavement. So that's, again, been interesting, talking about our work without actually being able to talk about our work, which I'm sure you can understand has been really, really exciting. So we've got new research which is looking at Cambridge's colonial histories. We're focusing on deepening relationships with communities in Cambridge, communities that we haven't always taken along, or communities who don't necessarily feel welcome in our museum spaces. And then also developing practice. What are we doing in terms of skills? How are we supporting staff who don't necessarily feel like decolonization is for them? So across 2022 and 24, we've got our public program, which is Power and Memory. We found power to be a very interesting theme that constantly came up. So power in terms of the structures of our university, power in terms of where power sits in a museum, but also power in terms of who gets to access that power or have a say in how power is discussed in our museum spaces. And memory, because sometimes we have communities coming in, visiting their spaces, visiting ancestors, just finding a calming space. And also memory, because sometimes they feel that memory is denied to them. So that's kind of tapping into a lot of the work we're doing. So it's a program of events, displays, and interventions that will happen across 2022 and 24. And we've got a major exhibition which will be at the Fitzwilliam Museum. It's all the university museums coming together, but the Fitzwilliam is the largest, so it's going to be the host in many ways. It's looking at Cambridge and its relationship with Atlantic enslavement. I haven't put a title because it's been a work in progress, but that's in July 2023 and will go up to January 2024. Sorry for the font. So our long-term aims are to understand our past, to build and respond to the present. We found that 83% of our audiences feel that it is the job of our museums to investigate these colonial ties. And it's also been quite heartening to see that our audiences do support the work we're doing. And to also build an inclusive future, ensuring everyone feels welcome to visit our spaces. All right. Just giving you some of the values that we're building our community relationships on, and I'll talk to you about some of the work that we're doing. So we're trying to ingrain these values into all the work that the museums are doing. Because different museums function in different capacities, it's been quite interesting to see the different journeys our museums have been on. and to try and get a lot of the work that they're doing out in a public-facing forum. So we have respect for community voices, acknowledging lived experiences and trying to bring those lived experiences into discussions and workshops and influence labeling and the ways in which we engage with our community partners. A commitment to hearing from a wide range of people, particularly communities from minoritized backgrounds, taking on board dissent and critical feedback. There's been a lot of critical feedback, which has been really, really helpful in questioning the work we're doing, but also understanding that the decolonization we think is best practice isn't always best practice. So that's been quite a steep learning curve. Factoring in long timelines. All of you work with communities, you know sometimes how much time it takes, but sometimes because of funding and short-term aims that we have, it's trying to instill that kind of confidence in our communities that we're taking them on board a longer journey, but also that we're trying to meet some shorter-term goals as well. So working with care, paying a lot of time and effort to understanding the ways in which we can nurture well-being practices, that we're not always the ones saying that we're creating safe spaces, because those spaces aren't always safe. But trying to sort of hear how we can support well-being within our staff, but also support the well-being of communities that we're bringing on really, really challenging projects for. And committing to change. So the University Museums, as you won't be surprised, isn't a very diverse space. So when we do have a Legacies project, we have communities asking us, are you really the right people? So as a result, we have staff asking themselves, are we really the people who should be doing this work? The long-term aims are also to change the way in which the infrastructures in our institutions work, to try and get more diverse voices within the museums. So it's slow, but it's taking place. So I'll give you an example of one of the kind of projects that we've been working on, and I'll tell you a bit about some of the others. So in September 2022, we ran a pilot Power Walk series. The original aim was to call it Power Trip, but people said that was too negative a connotation. So here we are with Power Walk. What happened was we realized very early on that to take our museums on this journey, we also needed to get them to collaborate together. Now, our museums range from anthropology, archaeology, to history of science, to contemporary art, to history of art, to earth sciences, Polar Institute, all of them. We started getting a lot of our colleagues into the same space just to have a conversation about the things they wanted to see change in their museum, but also the different themes that they were tackling with sort of the Legacies project. And we found power continuously started cropping up. Power sometimes in how helpless people felt, power in terms of where objects lie and where the histories lie, who gets to be the kind of gatekeeper of culture, but also understanding that power was tied quite intrinsically to race, migration, and very, very complex issues. So then we were also talking to community partners at this point and going through consultation and hearing that they wanted to see a lot of connections between the museums, because they'd go into, let's say, something like the Fitzwilliam, which is one of the larger facing museums, but they wouldn't necessarily know about our Whipple Museum, which is the history of science, which is you have to physically open a door to walk through a department to go in. So automatically, people didn't want to open that door and go into that museum. But starting a dialogue about that, and we have very, very passionate members in our team who are constantly sort of telling them, open the door, or they're standing in the door, or just starting a conversation around the door, just hanging around, getting people in. So we started this Power Walk series where we invited people to come to 2 museums, and we had our museum professionals sort of talk about 3 to 4 objects and their kind of personal connections with them, but also the kind of research that's going on. It was a conversational style format when we started it. We weren't entirely sure if it was something people would want to engage with. We were trialing it to see how comfortable people felt in those spaces. And also, in a way, sneakily and not so sneakily, it was also giving practice to a lot of our learning team and our collections people who didn't necessarily feel very confident talking about these stories to a public-facing audience. They would talk internally in the kind of circles we cohabitate, but they wouldn't necessarily feel very confident talking to just any group coming in. So it filled that kind of dual purpose. it opened up a discussion about each object and then providing a space for people just to reflect on what that experience was, what they were learning about, how they felt about it. And we started collecting feedback. So feedback that was informal, which was a lot of me lurking and listening to conversations, which is quite dubious ethically, but also collecting written feedback and then over lunch sort of having a conversation about, do you think this is something you'd want to come to? Do you think your friends would want to come to it? Would you bring your children to it? Would you recommend it to schools that you're part of in PTMs? And it was really, really positive because there was criticism in terms of how maybe it could be better sort of dealt with, how maybe there was more reflection that needed to be provided. But they felt that it was a really informal, quite a relaxed format to engage with a project around decolonization that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with. We've also found that language plays such an important factor. So people won't necessarily feel comfortable with the word decolonization because they attribute it to a very academic way of thinking, a way of thinking that is not necessarily for them. But we invite them to come and just listen to objects, engage with labels that don't talk about their complex cultures and histories, and that they can understand. So far, we've had Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, Zoology, Whipple, and Sedgwick take part. We're trying to offer it on a Saturday every 2 months and try and get as many of our museums involved. What was interesting was a lot of our community participants would expect a talk like this from, let's say, anthropology and archaeology, but they wouldn't necessarily assume that you'd come into zoology, hear about something like honey creepers that were sort of went into extinction because of European colonization, and then tie it into conservation practices that are happening today. So it was quite interesting that it changed the way in which they wanted to engage with our museums and that they wanted to come back. So this was from the first pilot that we did, where this is in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And some of the quotes said that it was really engaging and that they realized that there was heart in that work. And that's actually been something that has really boosted a lot of confidence in our staff as well, that people do want to hear this. And that if someone asks them a really complex question that they don't have an answer to, they can say no. But I'll look into it, and we're looking into it, and people appreciated that honesty. So it was useful to also trial a way in which you can say, no, I don't have all the answers, and that people actually won't take that with extreme hostility. Some of the other projects that we're working on, so we have Museum Remix, which is an ongoing experiment in museum storytelling. It's been happening since 2018, and it will happen in January 2022 now. We've been working with communities through creative workshops, just opening up our museum spaces and introducing a dialogue, and just looking at the ways in which we're telling stories and what's missing over there. So we've engaged with sort of LGBTQIA stories. We've kind of had interventions within our museum spaces to understand what's missing. We've looked at innovative sort of storytelling practices. And this year we'll be focusing on producing audio content and just inviting communities to engage with different objects, and then getting the public to understand that communities are welcome in our spaces and that you can just come along and just have a chat with any of us. We've also got pop-up conversations, which is a series of pop-up events that will be running either in advance of or while our exhibition is going on. And this is because the exhibition has many hyperlocal stories, so around white abolitionists, around kind of the role that Cambridge has played in enslavement. And we're trying to also tap into some of our regional audiences and encourage that kind of discussion to see the ways in which we can possibly change the way in which we engage with them, or also the ways in which we can alter a bit of our storytelling. We've got an archival project which is tapping into a need to develop community archives, and we'll be working with Black Cultural Archives, so Black Lives Matter activists in Cambridge, and the BME campaign from the university. And we have Power to the Program, which is an open call, part of the Cambridge Festival. It's a new strand that we've introduced in response to the project that the museums are doing. And we're going to sort of put out a call there, tell communities to suggest proposals and projects that they want to see in the museum space, and then support them logistically to make sure that project happens. Sorry, I feel like I'm going out of breath, but there's more. I'll give you a little bit about evaluation. So, not to get things wrong, I've got notes for this. So between July and November 2021, the university museums added a research question to the standard post-visit audience survey. This was automatically emailed out to those who had booked tickets, because obviously we were looking at ticketed entries. And the question was, the museums are committed to an ongoing investigation into the complex histories of the collections. Do you think it's the responsibility of the museums to be doing this work? And if so, why? We had 2,007 people respond to the survey between July and September. 70% of them answered. Out of the 70%, 80% were sort of broadly positive. We had 15% who were negative, and 3% of the responses were unclear, uncertain, or just an answer. The positive responses varied between museums with 77 to 95% of our visitors keen for us to investigate these areas. Got a word cloud, because who doesn't like a word cloud? Overall, visitors felt that if we were committed to these investigations, then we should research responsibly. And that's something that continually comes up in our conversations, the ethics of care and responsibility and where it sits. The topics are part of all our histories. So these are some of the things that have come out. So these topics are part of all our histories, and any work on these themes should be combined with action. And this includes, but shouldn't be limited to, communicating and educating, especially focusing on young people. And again, every time we have community members coming on board, they constantly push the role that museums play in educating about different cultures, providing access, and also the role it can play for young people. So these are just some of the words that have come about through our survey. But communities, audiences have also said we should be addressing this work in a balanced way. They have different ideas of what balance means, and that's opened up a conversation between our colleagues as well in terms of what we think about balance. And some visitors have commented that this work should not dominate everything or divert from the other roles that museums play. Now, our museums have an important position in this debate because of our remit to collect, curate, and educate, which uniquely positions us and adds to our responsibility in this area. And that's something that audiences have pointed out. Now, staff needs, and that's been an ongoing evaluation that we've been doing. To understand staff needs and measure impact, the university museums have undertaken innovative evaluation as part of a comprehensive evaluation strategy. So along with kind of having focus groups with communities, we've also undertaken an annual staff survey and continuing a longitudinal study with a selection of staff. So every 6 months, staff are kind of interviewed and asked about how they're going along the Legacies project, how different kind of workforce development has impacted them. So we had 2 staff surveys which were delivered online. The first was between July and August 2021 and had around 79 responses. The second survey received responses from May to June, and we had 147 people answering this survey. Now, this increase in response could also demonstrate an increasing kind of broader understanding of the program. And this is what our team has sort of been pushing for, to make sure we get as many people engaged. And it's not just the curators and collections people or the learning team, that everybody feels that they can be a part of this project because they are a part of this project. So we had confidence levels, and both surveys asked staff to rate their level of confidence on a range of topics. So across all topics, there was a general slight increase in confidence between 2021 and 2022. And it was most marked when data was separated for those who attended development sessions and those who didn't. Staff that attended development sessions had a higher confidence level when engaging with legacies-related topics. And these results were especially impressive given that not all of the themes were covered by the survey, which were directly addressed by the sessions that we were providing. Many of the resources are now available as well on our staff pages, so that it's not just kind of live interaction, but that they can go back and think about what they're engaging with. In terms of challenges to the work, in both 2021 and 2022, The survey acknowledged the challenges that doing this work brings. And staff were asked which of these were causing them the greatest concerns and could choose as many options. And they were giving an array of options. So members of staff were fearful about making mistakes, and that has come about quite strongly in all the work that we're doing. It's the fear of saying something wrong or not being up to date with terminology. And so sometimes that hinders even trialing sessions that they want to do. Staff who attended development sessions appear to acknowledge that doing this work was going to take a significant amount of time, that they can't be expected to suddenly become experts on things around the legacies of empire and enslavement. But nobody who attended the session thought that the work was irrelevant to their job and institution, which was really helpful. Now that in turn has influenced a lot of our workforce development. And the reason I'm talking to you slightly in more detail about developing relationships and workforce development is because I play a more active role in these two. So we have been developing and delivering workshops on decolonization and decolonial terminology. So again, they're available on our staff pages, but we try and do sessions that can range from just a talk to a workshop to a bite-sized talk, and sometimes it's just people wanting to come and have a one-to-one. And a lot of that is just kind of sitting and hearing some of the struggles the museums are having, especially with audiences coming and asking them about the work they're doing around this. Informed by our staff impact study and our all-staff survey, we've delivered a wave of internal communications just to make sure we're covering. We found that just having workforce development sessions doesn't necessarily work. But that other means, because some people feel much more confident engaging with material or packs or just kind of internal communication. There's a dedicated staff newsletter, we have blogs, we're constantly looking at posters, which is why the font, working around sort of how visually we're also talking about our work. We've got the UCM partnerships. We visit individual museums and constantly kind of update them on the work we're doing. We try and make sure we hit all staff meetings so we get as many people involved. We've also started a legacies coffee chat. We found that people just want to talk over coffee, so let's capitalize on that a bit. Let's hit them when they're unaware. But the legacies chat became a really interesting forum where people brought some of their anxieties, which they wouldn't necessarily bring in a development session. So everything from the things that have worked in their museums to some of the things that they're fearful about, some of the things that they are scared to trial but want to have a chat with us about. It became a good kind of relaxed format where everybody was just sharing information. We've got, in the new year, we're developing sort of, again, bite-sized sessions. We found the Power Walk events could be incorporated into some of our training, especially bringing our volunteers and front of house staff on board. So they're looking at some of the research going on, they're looking at how learning teams are engaging, but then they're also getting a sense of which objects are being researched and discussed. We have a Changemakers network, which has representatives from all the museums. We meet fairly regularly to discuss the work we're doing in our museums. And we've also got a new support network for staff of color across the consortium. And we're also constantly trialing new ways of exploring decolonization. So it's really helpful to come to spaces like this and hear about the work colleagues are doing. But before I end, sorry, I have gone somewhere, but I'll just talk to you about one of the sessions we're trialing. We had a group of young work experience students coming in, and we were thinking about the ways in which we could talk to them about empire and enslavement. We found that they weren't necessarily very aware of empire, so we had to quickly kind of make do with maps. But when we threw the word decolonization, there was a bit of sort of barrier there. We'd asked them to get some personal objects with them, and then they started telling us about, why this personal object means, why it's important to them, why they brought it along. And then we took that away from them and said, now it belongs to us, to the museum. Please make a case for why you'd like this object back. Interestingly, they could understand the power dynamics of a museum much more when we took something personal to them away. And then they had to sort of make a case of why it was relevant it then shifted this kind of understanding of how museums are gatekeepers in many ways, and how labels obviously don't tell all the stories. And then we picked a few objects from the museums that we had personal connections with and told them a bit about culture and relevance there. Trialing that, we then realized could be a way in which we could talk to some of our less engaged staff about things like decolonization and the power structures within a museum. So sometimes something that we trial in learning, which has been really helpful and gets students engaged or young people engaged or even community members engaged, we then try and trial with our staff to see if they find that slightly more processable, relatable, and then it gives them slight more agency to discuss the museum as their own space, which it is. So I'm going to stop. My slides were actually much brighter, so imagine a bright yellow, a happy yellow. But I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or to have a chat later. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That was really fascinating and a really good example of the work that the Collections Fund can support. So thanks so much for that. So I'm delighted to welcome our final speakers, Eugene and Tia, who are going to be talking about the work of We Don't Settle, which is a Birmingham-based organisation which creates opportunities for young people to tell their own stories and does lots more, I think, but I'll leave Tia and Eugene to talk to that. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you for that introduction, Simon. I firstly just want to say I'm probably going to be a bit rusty as I've had to do most of my presentations online for the past 2 years, so please bear with me. But that being said, hello everyone. I just want to say thank you for inviting us to speak at this event. We're really grateful and honored to speak about our organization and project in front of you all, and we really hope the presentation resonates with you all. So I will start off by, I'll firstly talk about our vision and mission. So our vision is for young people who are minoritized by society, systems, and structures to feel empowered and encouraged not to settle for the status quo. And our mission is to nurture communities, to platform untold stories, and to amplify unheard voices through the arts, culture, and heritage. I'm now going to talk a bit more about who we are and our history and kind of how we came to this point where we are today. So, We Don't Settle is a legacy organization of Beat Freaks Arts and the Don't Settle program, and launched independently in April 2022. So we're still quite a young organization. Don't Settle has been working in the last 4 years with young people of color and our heritage partners from Birmingham and the Black Country to co-create ecosystems of youth engagement that challenge and support heritage spaces to become more inclusive and equitable, thus advocating for more sustainable attempts at decolonization. So Beat Freaks Arts in particular aimed at pioneering arts activism and existed to give young people space mentally, physically, and digitally to tell stories about themselves, their communities, and what they care about in the world. So we like to use this little formula to kind of describe, to kind of put simply to explain the kind of merge, and that's literally Beat Freaks Arts plus the Don't Settle projects equals We Don't Settle. And yeah, we are now a non-for-profit organization committed to nurturing and empowering communities of young people who are minoritized, again, by society, systems, and structures.
So we are funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund through the Kick the Dust scheme that's aimed to engage more young people with the heritage sector. Through the years, we've partnered with Birmingham City University, Birmingham Museums Trust, Chance Heritage Trust, and Roundhouse. So to give you a little bit of an overview, there are 4 separate strands of Don't Settle. So firstly, there's our creator program. It aims to interrogate the relationships between the heritage sector and POC audiences. More specifically, these programs look at the stories and narratives told within the sector, and by extension, the unheard voices behind those stories. Lunar campfires interrogate the way heritage spaces are used by providing true open spaces for discourse within heritage organisations. So young POC are able to discuss their own identities and the topics that surround them. So our governance stream focuses on the heritage sector's decision-making processes and power structures. So by facilitating relationships between young people and heritage organisations, we aim to champion a sustainable rather than tokenistic change in the sector. I'm just going to say, you're a bit scary on it, so just give me a bit. And finally, there's our unlocked research strand. This involves checking ourselves and our methodology and bringing all these strands together into easily digestible research pieces. So unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through each individual project we have facilitated, but we have chosen a few of our favourites.
Yeah. I'm gonna particularly speak about one of our most recent programs, and some of you may have already seen this before BMAG closed for the year. But yeah, that is essentially, these are essentially all the projects under the Curator program that we've delivered. As we said, we'd love to go through all of them, but I'm going to talk about We Are Birmingham in particular, or WAB as we like to call it internally. We do love our abbreviations at We Don't Settle. WAB. As I mentioned, we have so many amazing curator programs, but yeah, I thought I'd speak about one of our more recent. So the We Are Birmingham program was created in partnership with Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery to redisplay the museum's iconic round room. So a team of 6 wonderful young women of colour, Lauren, Justine, Kieran, Mashara, Gabriella, and Olivia, worked together to define what it means to be from Birmingham and portray this in artwork presented in the round room. So starting in April 2021, the group met regularly to learn about the heritage sector and have sessions with individuals from both organizations to gain the skills required to plan the exhibition. The group instantly hit it off and created a friendship that will potentially last a lifetime. So one of the ways in which the group worked to better reflect the people of Birmingham in this exhibition was through a consultation held in Victoria Square. And through this consultation, they met wonderful people and had very insightful conversations. But a common theme that arose was the lack of diversity seen in museums and the hope for more interactive displays in the future. The WAB, or We Are Birmingham team, used this information to shape the exhibition plan. They curated and sourced art pieces for the display, found archived and commissioned pieces, and worked with social media staff from BMAG to create posts to raise awareness of the work they were doing. And as Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery closes for the year to undergo renovations, the impact isn't just felt in testimonials from people within minoritized communities in Birmingham, but also the young people. I'm going to read out a quote from one of the young people, Mashara, on her experiences. Having embarked on this journey, I have gained a multitude of competencies that will be useful for both the short and long term. These include team building skills, collaboration and networking skills, but most importantly, I have developed a passion for bringing awareness to important social issues and then finding potential solutions to them.
So another project of ours and a personal favourite of mine was the My Voice, My Path, Our History audio tour, which launched earlier this year. I should probably mention that I worked on this project as an activator, though that's not the reason it's my favourite. The free audio tour was co-written and researched by 5 passionate young women of colour who worked with producers at We Don't Settle and Roundhouse Birmingham. All of the activators agreed that Black history is so often only recorded orally and can easily be lost to time. The effect of world disasters like the pandemic on our communities have only cemented the need for this information to be properly recorded. Our cohort worked long and hard to deliver this project, delving into archives and tracking down individuals. The full tour covers stories that range from nearly 200 years ago to the modern day, with the activators even securing an interview with poet and local legend Benjamin Zephaniah. There you go.
Thank you, Tia. Just move it aside. Oh, I don't know why that ended up a bit weird, but yeah, so apologies for the text. But the next kind of program I'd like to talk about is our Lunar Campfires program, and this really is personal to me because this was the program I was involved in as a resident on the program before I got employed by Don't Settle to work as a community developer and now community and content manager. So it does hold a special place in my heart because I wouldn't have been where I am today if I had not been on this program and developed personally and professionally. So as before, like these are all the Lunar Campfires we've delivered over the years. The project has existed, and I'm going to talk about one in particular, which is Get Out of Our Country. They all have these like interesting titles that are meant to resonate with people. So the one I'm going to talk about is Get Out of Our Country, but Leave Your Culture. So in December of 2019, we had our 4th Lunar Campfire, and at this point, the Lunar residents, myself included, were much more experienced when it came to creating a lunar event, as I remember feeling so confident going into this one. Appropriation or appreciation. One person's culture has become another person's trend. As a result of the riveting discussions had in the last 3 lunars, we found that when talking about ethnicity, the topic of culture naturally came up, giving us inspiration for this Lunar Campfire event, which basically aims to explore the blurred lines between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. When are you stealing from a culture and monetizing on it? When are you paying respect and homage to another culture? And how can we, as a digital society without borders, check and educate ourselves on the differences between appropriation and appreciation? And what I particularly love the most about Lunar Campfires is the unpredictability of what you will learn and what people will take away from the event. The young people found this amazing way to learn from people, some of which shared lived experiences, which naturally brings light to perspectives seldom thought of. The last strand I'm going to, it's a bit loud. The last strand I'm going to speak about before we end the presentation is our research on Lockstrand, particularly the outcome, which is a booklight that we've labeled decolonization-ish, which I will explain in a minute. Yeah, so decolonization-ish is a practical guide shaped by reports on the Don't Settle program written by the young people on our research program, Tara, Hannah, Laura, and Ida. So decolonization is a resource that heritage organizations can utilize to contribute to the process of dismantling colonial structures within heritage spaces. This is a quote from the booklet explaining why we use the term decolonization-ish. The term is used because we find the term decolonization too limiting. It assumes that there is an endpoint where we can eliminate the effects of colonialism from our heritage sector, which just isn't the case. The issue is more complex and nuanced than you can ever imagine. This booklight is merely just one of many beginnings, aiming to begin the work, even though there isn't an obvious endpoint. The information in this booklight will take you step by step through good practice, bad times, and what some young POC would want to see in times to come.
But the story doesn't end there. In researching decolonisation-ish, it was clear that there has been long-standing disconnect between young people of colour and traditional heritage spaces. It's a whole new world out there for heritage organisations as well, especially as issues of race, age, gender and LGBTQ+ have moved further into the limelight. It can be difficult to navigate, especially if you don't belong to the groups you are trying to platform. These thoughts eventually manifested into ideas, and these ideas became our advocacy campaign. Once launched, it will consist of a range of resources that can aid organisations in their decolonisation journey. We are very excited for you all to see the finished product when it launches in January.
That's pretty much the end of our presentation. I was initially going to read out these testimonials, but I'll just leave them up for a second so anyone can read them. But thank you so much for listening to our presentation.
thanks so much, Tia and Eugene. That was wonderful and a really great, wonderful way to end the conversations we're having today with these fantastic examples of the work you're doing in the communities you're engaging with. Is really brilliant. So I think you're probably sticking around for a bit. So yeah, they're a great organisation to work with. So I'm sure they'll want to chat. I'm sure they've got a lot more to say about the work you do. So thanks so much. So that's it now. Next, we're going to have drinks, short drinks reception. In there is to celebrate the next phase of the Esme Fairburn Collections Fund. Before we do that, I'd like to thank a few people, all the speakers. It's been, I hope you agree, it's been a really good day. I'd like to just thank all the delegates. Thanks for coming here in person, and thanks to our online delegates. I'd particularly like to thank Birmingham Museums Trust. As you know, this is a free event for our members, and we can't make them free events without the support of our institutional members. So thanks to Birmingham Museums Trust, and particularly Dan and his colleague for doing the tech, which is really fantastic, and Murphy, who's been helping, leading in the background, doing all the drinks and catering. So the drinks are in there. We're going to open up here so people can go into the Futures Gallery. I don't think you're allowed to bring, well, no, you're not allowed to bring drinks into the Futures Gallery, so don't do that. And that's it, really. The only other thing to say, me and Simon Brown are going to try and find somewhere to watch the football. Non-football fans and football fans are welcome, as are suggestions of where we could actually go, preferably somewhere in between here and the train station. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming.